Hello and welcome. I'm Debra and I have the pleasure of sharing with you the first of 4 classes on nutrition and early recovery. And it is my hope that you will take these tools and not only help prevent relapse and help you on your path of sobriety, but support you in a life of wholeness and health. So let's start out with the agenda for all 4 weeks, and then we'll jump into week 1. So in week 1, we're going to be talking about the missing link, pioneers in chemistry, including AA founder Bill W. What's nutrition got to do with it? Hypoglycemia. Then in class 2, we're going to talk about what's food got to do with it, the 5-star pro-recovery diet. In class 3, we'll talk about what do neurotransmitters have to do with it, and amino acids. Class 4 is all about what's the gut got to do with it. Feeding the brain, healing the gut, and a review of the 4 weeks to help you prevent relapse. So without further ado, let's jump into week 1. The agenda is, again, the missing link, talking about pioneers in this world of biochemistry, what's nutrition got to do with it, and then what's hypoglycemia got to do with it. And I am presenting on behalf of the Academy for Addiction and Mental Health Nutrition, who really helped me find the missing link in addiction. And that missing link is first based on, it is a biopsychosocial spiritual illness. And traditional treatment programs are focused on the psychology, social, and spiritual aspects. And the result is a really high relapse rate. In fact, it's only in the teens where we're having success rates, maybe in the 20s. And yet we continue to do it over and over. And there's not other things that we would do in the medical world with that low of a success rate. So what is missing? The missing link is our bodies, i.e. our chemistry. Anybody who's dealt with a toddler who's having a bad day because they're hungry or not sleeping, and they're throwing themselves on the ground in frustration, knows that we've got to address what's going on in our bodies. The third leg of the stool is what we're going to be talking about. And that first we have addressed the mind, the body, the spirit, and then the missing piece has been the body. And you need all 3 for recovery. And if you've ever sat on a 2-legged stool, it's possible, but you have to be using your legs for the third. And if you relax or aren't paying attention, there you go on your bottom. What we're going to try to do is provide, in these 4 weeks, the tools to allow you to put that third leg for stability, not only in your recovery program, but in your life. We're going to work on feeding the brain and healing the gut. So here's a pioneer in biochemistry, and that's the co-founder of AA, Bill W. He himself had a deficiency in B3 or niacin. And he had these symptoms of irritability, anxiety, poor concentration, apathy, depression, and diarrhea. And he spent the last 11 years of his life promoting B3 therapy. He came across a physician out of Canada who helped him use mega doses of niacin. And after 2 weeks, he was able to eradicate all of the symptoms that he'd lived his whole entire life with. When he was asked what was his greatest achievement, the founders of AA would have hoped that he would have pointed to Alcoholics Anonymous, but instead he said it was promoting B3 therapy. He wrote not 1, not 2, but 3 pamphlets and was shut down by the World Organization, which I'm sure he was a board member at that point in time, because it was a spiritual program and not a nutritional program. But he talked about 3 squares, which will be important as we talk about hypoglycemia. And then he himself had experienced this profound assistance through nutritional therapy to maintain his happiness and wholeness in sobriety. Another pioneers is this book written by Dr. James Millam and Catherine Ketchum. And Under the Influence was actually published in 1981. And they point out the fact that 95% of alcoholics are hypoglycemic. And as we talk about that later on, you're going to realize what a profound factoid that is. And the question about why it's not common knowledge continues to befuddle me, but I hope that after the end of this 4 weeks, you'll understand the importance of that and will help share that with your family, because as we all know, certainly myself having generations of both mental illness and alcoholism in my family, this is a family disease. Genetics and time play a role. One of the counselors gave me an excellent example. If you have your XY axis, and one is time and another is the usage, the greater the amount of the substance, the greater the time, the greater the risk. But those numbers on that XY axis are unique to each and every person. But with alcohol, every single person will become addicted to it over time. The amount of time that alcohol has been in the culture is a big factor. The Jewish culture has had alcohol in their culture 3,000 years, and their recidivism rate is 1%. In his book, he writes. And yet, the American Indians have had alcoholism in their culture, alcohol being introduced by the white man, for only 300 years, and their addiction rate is running in the 2/3 to 3/4. So what happens over that time? Either that gene dies out if it's genetic, or you learn to adapt. And having had an opportunity to be in Israel, in the Gezer region, which is the breadbasket, they have become foodies. They will start out with 5 salads before they even get to the first course. They are focused on food, and that nutritional focus has helped them to have vibrant and healthy lives. Another one that was profound for me to find this resource was Joan Matthews Larson. I was actually in a meeting and someone brought this book saying that they were trying to get their wives sober across the hall from an AA meeting. And so I fell into this book like a camel to water. She had a son, after his father died, begin drinking. And she got him into recovery. He was profoundly depressed in this halfway house, and she could see it. And then he committed suicide. So that's when she began to research what she calls the myth of rehab. With only a success rate of 24%, she asked the questions, why do we keep doing what we continue to do that's not working? She talked about alcohol biotypes. For instance, one has extra liver enzymes that allow them to process alcohol without killing themselves. And those folks are the ones you hear that are drinking not 1, not 2, but 3 or 4/5 of alcohol and still alive at the end of the day. On the other end, there's a lot of Asian cultures who have very low enzymes, and thus they actually flush upon the first drink of alcohol. She identified hypoglycemia as a factor, and the fact that just not drinking results in dry drunk, and the symptoms are very much the same. She applied diet and supplements and amino acid therapy and took the success rate from 24% to 74%. And that was published in 1984. So having this information about hypoglycemia published in 1981 and then this published in 1984, one has to ask yourself, why don't we know that as a common part of a recovery that we address? Well, this is a story that will seem like it makes no sense to you, but it was helpful for me. You may have heard about the soldiers in the British Navy called limeys. Well, for centuries, many of these sailors and their doctors cured and prevented scurvy by sending out oranges and lemons on the boats with them. Well, there was few university-trained physicians who did that. They would make tinctures and they would send them out on the boats, and they would literally die by the hundreds. Well, in 1747, a gentleman by the name of James Lind described a trial where he proved that citrus fruit cured scurvy. And 40 years later, note that, 40 years later, the British Navy made that a compulsory part of their process for sailors. Then they changed to lime juice in 1860 and it came back. But it was another 100 years before scurvy was shown to be a deficiency of an essential food factor, vitamin C, characterized as absorbic acid that could cure and prevent scurvy. And the reason I point this out is how long it takes us to absorb new information and make it prolific. And in this one, it's just one group. There's no diversity, no age, no sex to consider. It's just men, sailors, all from the same European background. And yet it took that long. And think about the complexities of what we deal with mental health, our food supply, processed foods, and the fact that we can have grapes from Brazil in January. So we have so many more valuable variables than it was in this point in time. And so I give that to you to let you understand that you will in fact be pioneers when you go out into your families and to your friends and help to share this message. A current day pioneer is Dr. Amen, and he has written many books. He's a psychiatrist who loved imaging, and through SPECT scanning, which I'll show you in a minute, he actually takes a picture of our brain, because he said psychiatrists are the only ones who are dealing with treatment where they can't see what's wrong, what's broken, what's the patient. It's like going back into the Victorian days, and the women were literally clothed to their wrists with collars to their necks and dresses to the floor, and a physician could only look at them, their hands and their face, to try and diagnose them. It would be like that same era when it comes to addiction and what's going on with our brain. He has a lot of controversy about this as a diagnostic tool, but what it has really definitely done is help us understand there's something broken in our brains. He has a nutrition proponent he's very big on in terms of helping to rebuild our brain, and authored 30 books, and this was the first that I ran across, Change Your Brain and Change Your Life. Here's some of his SPECT images, because he helps answer that question that was very key to me, that if addiction is a disease, what's broken? And these images help us see that. You can find him on Instagram as well as his website. If you'd like to follow him, I would suggest you do that. He put out this one, Is Alcohol a Healthy Food? And you would look at these two brains, this being the healthy one, smooth, and any of these deviations and divots are in fact where there's not function going on in the brain. So that's only a moderate drinker of 2 to 4 glasses of wine a day, and yet you can see it's obviously impacting our health. I smile a lot of times when people say, why don't you drink? And I say, you know, they told us in college that it would kill our brain cells. And I'm of an age that, having come to believe that's true, I really can't afford to do it anymore. So I can laugh about it during a cocktail party, but it's not a laughing matter when you're caught in the addiction and the downward spiral of this. This one is a marijuana user, which there's therapeutic reasons to use cannabinoids, but it also has its detriment for a heavy marijuana use versus a healthy brain. And we need to be cognizant that everything we eat, smoke, and drink does affect our health. This one is inclusive, and I'm going to walk you around the chart. This again is the healthy upside of the brain scan, and this is the healthy underside of the brain scan. This particular brain reflects a 28-year-old with 3 years of meth usage. This reflects a 45-year-old with 10 years of alcohol. This one is a 32-year-old with 4 years of cocaine. And you see there's a lot of spaces and missing brain activity. If you look on the underside, here's a 17-year-old with 4 years of marijuana, 22-year-old with 4 years of smoking, and the last one down here is a 38-year-old with 6 years of opiate usage. So different areas of the brain are impacted differently by which substance, but I think you can see by these contrast with the healthy that they aren't helping us be a clear and clever kid. So what's nutrition got to do with it? So how many diseases, mental illnesses, do you think there are? When you think about scurvy, which we just talked about with a deficiency of vitamin C, polio, a virus, rickets, a deficiency of vitamin D, which is resurfacing again as we spend more time indoors, diabetes, and failure for our pancreas to function properly and make insulin, arthritis, an autoimmune disease that affects our joints, alcoholism and all of the other addictions, spina bifida, a deficiency of B12 that causes a deficiency, affects a baby born. So pylorrhea, which about 40% of alcoholics have, which is deficiency of zinc and B3s. So, how many do you think there are? 1? 1,000? 5,000 or more? 10,000 or more? Or do you think maybe it's in the millions or some other number? Well, according to Raymond Francis, there's only one disease, and that's when the cell malfunctions, when the breakdown occurs at a cellular level. And he says there's really only 2 basic causes for this. 1, nutritional deficiency, like we demonstrated with scurvy, and 2, exposure to toxins, such as many of us have been doing in this room. So here are the signs of a starving brain, and Homer eating his donuts certainly isn't feeding his brain well. Cravings, brain fog, can't focus, can't remember, tired, wired, and feeling weird. Upset stomach, diarrhea, constipation, can't sleep, and irritable, anxious, depressed. And one of the things, when people talk about weird and not feeling part of themselves in their own bodies, when I'm attending open meetings, I always ponder on that and have thought of, in fact, what if, because of deficiencies in brains and not firing, as we'll talk about later, that literally those folks are working in a black and white world. Those of us who are healed and recovered and eating well and an optimum brain function are living in a technicolor world. And we would see the world so differently that it would make one feel a little weird if you were still back in black and white. There's also pains of headaches and fibromyalgia associated with some of these starving issues. And that, again, most people in late recovery have really stopped eating. And when they do eat, their food choices are not all that healthy. Now, substance abuse also equals digestive issues, and we'll talk a lot more about that when we get into the last week. And lack of digestion equals lack of absorption equals lack of nutrients, whether vitamin C or niacin B3. By middle-late stages of addiction, most folks are profoundly nutrient depleted. And as I said, if you're here today in rehab, high odds your brain is starving. A starving brain is an offline brain, and the only voice that's talking is the addict voice. When you're offline, you can't access the front part of your frontal lobe, your cortex, the area of the brain. And when you prevent that access, you've got due again, as we talked about, nutrition and other biochemical factors like toxins. Because an impaired frontal cortex function leads to cravings and relapse. So this frontal lobal prefrontal cortex is where we all have that ability to plan, organize, prioritize. It's where our self-control and our willpower come in. Impulse control, the ability to pause and slow down, think about the consequences, to problem solve and use our coping skills, and the ability to access the recovery tools and resources that is currently the first line of defense in recovery programs. An imbalanced brain equals a balanced life. But what throws the brain off balance? 3 top ones are low blood sugar, aka hypoglycemia, key nutrient depletion, and low neurotransmitters. Hormone imbalance, infections like Lyme disease, toxins such as mercury, lead, aspartame, and MSG, as well as autoimmune diseases and inflammation, all can help throw our brain into an inflammatory and off balance. The thing to note about this is you are what you are. Your DNA is pretty influential. But even now through epigenetics, we know that at night we turn on and off codes to affect our DNA. But for the moment, we'll say that's fixed. You are what you eat, you are what you drink, and you are what you think. And just think about that. 3 out of the 4 you have the ability to control. So now let's talk about hypoglycemia and what's it got to do with it. Now I'm going to use this fancy pen here because I wanted to point out to you that there's lots of lines here. And the one, this red line, is what a diabetic blood glucose will look like. They have too much insulin. This is a normal pattern of blood sugar. You're hungry, you eat, your blood sugar rises, and it goes back down. This one in green is what we're going to talk to. It goes up, too high, ooh, and it goes down too low, and then it comes back up. So this green line is what we're going to talk about in the next slide. So when you eat or drink a soda, a bagel, your blood sugar goes up. And because of insulin resistance, too much is produced and released. And then it starts to go down, 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 but it still continues to make the insulin even though you're already past baseline. At this point in time, your pancreas is on the job to try to help you out and shoots out some adrenaline to get that blood sugar soaked back up to normal. Because if you let your blood sugar go down at this point in time, you're actually heading for insulin shock, which can be fatal. So here your body is having to overproduce insulin, overproduce adrenaline. And if you were comparing this to mileage, this is not good mileage. You're going up and down and up and down. And what you want is to keep your blood sugar at a nice level. Think of a fuel-injected engine. You want to be giving your body protein and keeping your blood sugar firing after firing of the engine to keep you in high production. So symptoms of hypoglycemia: irritability, depression, aggression, insomnia, fatigue, restlessness, confusion, desire to drink or use, nervousness, and sometimes that aggression can be weepiness. A dry drunk or post-acute withdrawal is in fact the very same things. So when you hear about a dry drunk, it's because they have quit drinking, but they haven't addressed hypoglycemia. And if you remember the odds from the earlier slides, it was anywhere from 91 to 95, and a recent treatment center has been taking blood sugar of every single patient coming in, whether they're doing marijuana, benzos, alcohol, marijuana, opiates, heroin. It didn't matter. They all took a blood test. And over 20 years of everyone taking this blood test with all different kinds of substance, only 2 did not have hypoglycemia. So without going to a physician and paying for a 5-hour glucose test, it's probably a safe bet to assume you need to eat like you are a hypoglycemic. So the quiz question is, which food causes the greatest surge in blood sugar? So GI is the amount of glucose index and measures from 0 to 100 what happens when you eat food. So low is under 55, medium is 55 to 69, and high glycemic food is over 70. So this is a game you can write down and go for the gold here and see which one of these is in fact the highest to raise your sugar: banana, white sugar, a Snicker, whole wheat bread, or a protein smoothie. And the answer is, drum roll, whole wheat bread with a glycemic index of 71. Sugar came next with a GI of 68, a candy bar, then a banana, and lastly a protein shake. In fact, few foods can beat out wheat when it comes to spiking your blood sugar. Now, Dr. Perlmutter, who's a neurologist who wrote Grain Brain, asked the question, what if we're all sensitive to gluten, which is the protein in bread, from the perspective of our brain? And the next chart will help you understand why it's so important, because After the fireworks of high blood sugar, here's what happens. There's an immediate depletion of neurotransmitters, serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, GABA, and dopamine. And also the shrinking of our critical brain tissue. These 5 neurotransmitters, by the way, epinephrine is also adrenaline, are the natural street drugs that our bodies make to make us feel happy, energized, focused, relaxed, and calm. Who would want to give that up, right? And depleted neurotransmitters, when all of those are low, produce cravings, which equal relapse, because no one wants to be low on those key ingredients in making a healthy, happy life. Now, since you've been in rehab, have you switched your addiction to a legal one, sugar? Because sugar is also very addictive, and we'll talk more about that later. Now, relief for hypoglycemic is the pro-recovery diet, and we'll again talk about that next week, where you're going to have protein and complex carbs every 3 to 4 hours. So think about protein, which is your amino acids, and complex carbs, your fruits and veggies, every 3 to 4 hours. So you'd be fuel injected. Men, 60 to 80 grams of protein a day, and for women, 40 to 60. Plus fiber and healthy fats. And we'll talk more about how important fiber is, which is what you get in your fruits and vegetables, because that helps to heal your gut. And we'll talk more about why the gut's so important, as well as the brain. And premenstrual women actually need more protein and tend to relapse right before their cycle. So for those loved ones in your life, whether it be a mother, a sister, a girlfriend, a friend, make sure they understand they actually need to have extra protein at that time in their month. So the homework for this week is to keep a food diary. And it's a really simple thing. On a piece of paper, all you need to write down is everything you eat and drink. And I try to do it as soon as possible so I don't forget. Write down what you eat for breakfast, what you had, coffee, when you have a soda, a glass of water. Write down your snacks, a handful of nuts, a bagel, whatever it might be, and keep track of all those foods that you eat and drink throughout the day. There'll be a handout here for a mood food survey. Please complete it. And also a handout on hypoglycemia, relapse, and anger. Christine Veselak, who's the founder of the Academy, says that if people would manage their blood sugar, she thinks that we could reduce road rage by half. So that brings us to the end, and I would welcome any questions that you might want to direct. Feel free to call or email. It's been a delight to share with you the first week of this class on behalf of the Academy for Addiction and Mental Health Nutrition. And I look forward to talking with you and teaching more about this valuable skill of what does nutrition have to do with it and the pro-recovery diet next week.